So today, the topic definitely is the DLP, data loss prevention. So we have a great panel here. Join this panel, we have Leo and Jason also join this panel. We also have Maggie from Sun Life. Maggie is a AVP at Sun Life. And JP, Jean-Pierre from RBC. JP is Senior Director of Data Protection there. So Maggie, since you're there, so can you do a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Maggie. As you mentioned, I'm with Sun Life as the AVP of Security Governance and Risk Management. I work in the banks and insurance for over 20 years, and many of them are BMO, CIBC, Aviva, Scotia. I've covered many domains of information security, such as identity and access management, application security, vulnerability management, endpoint protection, data loss protection, network security, disaster recovery, business continuity, and GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance, and security assessments and such. So that's my experience, and thank you for inviting me tonight, and hopefully this information will be useful to everyone.
Excellent. Excellent. So very rich experience in all the banks, almost all the banks, and the financial industry. Great insights. Definitely looking forward to your insights. Leo and Jason, since maybe you can also introduce yourself, because I talk about you, but whatever you want to share, something we don't know about you. Jason, you probably can start.
Well, I like long walks, and essentially, no, you did a great job of the introduction. I don't really have any further to add.
What does that mean? A black belt? I still want to get.
Yeah. That's actually a great question. So, global black belt, in the terms of what it means inside Microsoft, is essentially your subject matter expert in some certain area. My area being that I didn't always work for Microsoft. I actually did records management and e-discovery litigation, as well as legal compliance for years. That's really like basically mapping audit controls to the processes, and DLP is a major component to that. It's one component, but I do, and actually those names of the banks, I did the information security audit for each one of those banks when they made the decision to go to the cloud.
Excellent. Yeah. Wonderful. All right. JP, are you ready? Or if you try to spare. Okay, so we still couldn't hear you. Leo, can you also talk about quickly, just one point interesting about yourself?
Interesting about myself? Wow, that's a
not
good
soccer
one.
Though.
I'm also a musician, so there you go.
Okay, cool. Something we don't know you.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on for the panel questions. We talk about DLP, right? So Jason and Leo actually cover a lot of concepts, great talks, all kind of things already in DLP. But I'd like to ask everybody here in the panel, what is the biggest misconception about DLP? Right, so what's wrong? So what's the wrong concept of DLP? What is DLP not about? So anyone can share your thoughts. Since Jason and Leo, you already talked, so I will let Maggie first.
Perfect. So one of the biggest misconceptions I think that I've heard over the news and in the media, especially when we see big breaches, data breaches that are happening, is that people tend to think that it doesn't really affect the company financially because they look at the price of the stock, and the stock price didn't get impacted right away, or didn't have long-term effects on the stock price. And so I think that's a big misconception, because people don't realize that the stock price is not the only indicator. There is so many things that come along with a major data breach, right? And if that happens, and there has been not enough security controls for data loss prevention, I think where companies are most hurt is that there is a lot of legal costs, credit monitoring. There is a lot of litigations that they have to go through. Scrutiny from the regulators as well is one of the major items. You don't actually want to be under the scrutiny of regulators. Fines that they typically give to the organizations, but the most important thing is that future business or future customers that you could have had as an organization, then that is lost, right? There is an opportunity cost that is lost. So I think people get confused about the fact that, the stock price didn't seem to change as much, or didn't have a big dip when you look at the charts. But that's one of the things that I think people need to be careful about, just assessing one data point versus the overall cost that affects the bottom line, right? The company's bottom line. So financially, it's a lot of money to be spent.
Right. So that does reflect the importance of a DLP, which is really expensive, actually. All right, cool. Leo, what's your view on that one?
Yeah, I can say that one of the big misconceptions is to think, like I mentioned before during my presentation, to think that the technology is going to solve all your issues, right? That DLP is a silver bullet, right? And at the end of the day, you have to think of DLP kind of like you would think of a BCP or DRP plan, where these are maintained throughout the year. Right, so your DLP program has to be maintained as well, has to be updated. Even so, or more so now with cloud and different changes that are happening. You have to make sure that plan is maintained. Procedures are updated, documentation is updated, and that you have the right people as well to help you manage these tools.
All right. So which means you cannot just, I implement something, job done, right? So you have to keep doing that, and it's a continuous journey. It's like a business operation, right? So you need to keep the ball rolling. Exactly. All right, Jason, what's your view on that one?
Yeah, and it's actually a fantastic question. I would say the number one misconception around DLP, what it isn't, is more on what people perceive the cloud will bring as part of DLP. The amount of times I've seen organizations, and rightfully or wrongfully so, and I would honestly say there's probably some people on this that have even heard this from Microsoft, that you move to the cloud and everything's fantastic and everything. There's a lot of things and benefits that cloud bring. One of those is not a solid security posture. Security is still, in any way, shape, or form, no matter what cloud technology or what the cloud vendor is selling to you, it is the responsibility of the controller. Meaning it is the client's responsibility to ensure that they use the technologies and implement them in the way that's going to make them comply and make them be secure. And by just simply moving to any cloud technology will absolutely not solve any problem. It is still similar to the on-premises world from that aspect. It's just now you get to take advantage of maybe things like global signals as opposed to your own internal signals only. So you still get benefit. It's just the biggest misconception I would say is that cloud will solve your data loss issues.
Excellent point. Because people ask, what's a silver bullet for everything, right? Cloud, a lot of related to that. But in fact, cloud actually make the things even more complex. Now you not only deal with on-premise, but also on the cloud and a hybrid cloud, all those things, right? Okay, good. So that's the first question, some misconceptions. Thanks for your great input. Now comes to, because you guys implemented quite a lot of DLP programs in various, doesn't matter, company or team or like different clients. So my big question for you guys is how to start a DLP program? What kind of factors you need to consider? Because we saw some questions from the audience, like what about for the small business? What about for this team? What about so how to start a DLP program in general? No specific order.
Maggie, do you want to take this?
Okay.
Sure. Like I'm showing on my screen as the first one, so I don't know how I show over there, but sure, I'll go first. Yeah, so I think I don't think it matters whether it's a large company or a small company, a small business. I think the approach should always be to take and I think Leo spoke about having a data-centric approach, and I totally agree with that, where the organization's data assets are classified, are categorized by the sensitivity of the data, and as well as by how critical and they are to the mission of the organization, right? So it's important to have a good methodology that allows you to identify what are your crown jewels that you have to really protect more than the rest of the data. Understand what is the value to the business, where this data is stored. I think a lot of these points came up in the presentations from Jason and Leo, right? And fully agree with that. Who accesses the data, where the data is stored, what third parties, right? Like sometimes we forget about third parties, and what internal systems where are the data residing. And so once you have that, I think it's important then to have a clear objective and a strategy to understand what are the security controls that you want to implement, and what are the enhanced controls that you're going to be applying to those critical data sets. And then one of the major items that I think is important for the success of any DLP program is to collaborate with the business and understand from their perspective, right? And provide value to them by either making sure that they understand you are applying a risk-based approach, and that so that the investments can be prioritized. I think a lot of people, think that even big companies have big budgets and big pockets, but the reality is not. And so you always need to prioritize your investments, your security investments, and make the business understand how this is valuable to them to remain compliant with the regulations and so on. So it has to be a pragmatic approach versus applying the same rules to everything, right? Not all data is critical, and not all data is confidential. So it really has to be a data-centric approach.
Excellent. Yeah, I can see actually, I think one of the things, Maggie, your background also, the project management. I can feel there's quite a lot of related program management methodology behind, right? So that's great.
It's very useful to take a governance role, to be able to make sure that all your stakeholders are involved.
Yeah.
Versus just I really echoed the points that I think Leo, I think it was Leo or Jason that were saying, right, that you can't be it was Leo, you can't just be like a techie nowadays. You really have to work with the business and demonstrate that security is not a cost to the business, it's actually a benefit to them, right? And how we're providing value for them to gain new businesses and new clients and so on.
Excellent. All right, cool. JP, I can see you right now, so maybe you can do a quick introduction there.
Yeah, hi, sorry, that wasn't planned on my side. So I'm Jean-Pierre Malherbe. I'm a senior director for data protection. We do a lot of data security related things at RBC, and one of the areas that we are focusing on is data loss prevention and also the incident response processes that come with it.
Excellent. All right, cool.
Glad I'm back.
Okay, since you already finished your introduction, now we come up to how to start a DLP program. Can you give us your view on that one?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Typically, all data loss programs start off with some kind of risk assessment, or there was some kind of a gap analysis that was done, because there's normally a reason why you're going to go venture down to establish like a data loss program. The second thing is, as soon as that program gets started, there is typically a risk or mitigation activity that will follow that. It doesn't actually mean that it's just going to be a technology deployment, as you heard from Leonardo and from Jason. This is not a sort of technology play, although technology plays a role in some of the monitoring It's not the primary focus for any DLP program. And then as you sort of go down the program, you'll eventually get to some kind of state where you're looking at your controls and you want to put some kind of enhanced monitoring in. That brings in things like some, you keep hearing this talking about the people, process, and technology. It brings in the people that's going to manage these services. You're going to look at the monitoring profiling you do, engaging key stakeholders. And some of the stakeholders that people don't sort of typically think of is, because we're dealing with people and you're dealing with incidents and you're dealing with data, you have to involve like privacy areas. There's sometimes legal accountability, legal areas, because the data might be moving into areas where you don't have jurisdiction around touching it or acting on it. And then I mentioned privacy already. And then as far as your team, establishing a team that does the monitoring, enhancing it, it's a long journey. Like they were saying earlier, it's a crawl, walk, run, but it's quite a lot of things that's involved. Plus, there's multiple technologies and areas that you have to focus on. So,
Excellent. Yeah, I like what your point, because DLP, although itself is kind of like a one domain, but in fact it's related or collaborate with a lot of other factors. Like a JP, you mentioned like a business, GRC, privacy, or including resilience, incident response, right? So all those areas, you can see the DLP play some roles there. Okay, wonderful. Speaking of the DLP program, because each industry is different. Obviously, Maggie and JP, you're from financial industry. There are other industries. So I like to ask maybe Leo and Jason, you can comment because you see all kind of clients, their situation. So how is DLP working with different industry? Then I come back to the financial industry. I come to back Maggie and JP. All right. So if Leo, you can start. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I think that, obviously different industries have different compliance requirements, different laws that apply to them. So obviously that in itself changes how the DLP program is going to be scoped out moving forward. Because, for example, like I mentioned before, if you're talking about financial, typically we're looking, for example, at PCI, right? PCI compliancy. If we're talking about healthcare, then you're going to look at PIPEDA, right? So I think that, a lot has to do with, local laws, also specific compliance requirements for that industry, but also a lot has to do with the type of devices that plays an important role. Because, for example, if, I was engaged with a customer that was in manufacturing. So in manufacturing, not only do you have to, care about the information or the data because they handle intellectual property, but also they have a lot of OT/IoT devices, right? And these devices also may play an important role when it comes to data breaches. So this basically enhances the attack vectors, if you will, when it comes to these other industries. So you have to be very, very considerate of the industry and the type of devices that are also part of that industry.
Perfect. The IoT also, like if your camera still count as a part of the endpoint for your DLP, right? So that's great. Jason, what do you want to add on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I actually see it's less about industry specific. Like I would say, if I were to talk to the major banks that I deal with, every single one of them approaches DLP so significantly different than the other. And same with healthcare, same with government, like between two hospitals or between two government agencies. I will say that buying and procurement decision power makes a big difference, whether they're a capital expenditure versus operational expenditure or mindset organization, because that does unfortunately money does influence what they're going to do. And then finally, like I can't agree more, like regulatory definitely has a play. Like obviously you have to take into consideration PHIPA when it comes to Ontario Health, or PIPEDA when it comes to Canadian Privacy Acts and things of that nature. But yeah, I would say one thing I'm not seeing across the board, like I don't I get asked this question a lot, like what are others doing in industry like ourselves? And the unfortunate response that I usually give is, you might not want to follow their model because it's probably not going to fit your model, even though you're in the exact same industry. So it's interesting but that's generally what I see. Is I don't see like industries following any one's typical standard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's an overlap about all those things. So back to financial. Maggie and JP, you are in this industry for so many years. Anything you see from that part?
Yeah, I agree with what Jason and Leo mentioned, right? It has to do with complying to different regulations. But I think the only difference that I can say, having worked in the banks and insurance, is that, you know, in the banks, you're not really dealing with health information, versus in the insurance, you are dealing with health information. So that right there kind of tells you, you know, what other things you're doing. And when you're doing your DLP rules, what other policies you might want to enable to protect the different type of information. The other thing that I could see of a difference between industries is whether you're doing PCI, you're handling PCI data or not, right? So that's another big thing. So it's kind of those three major buckets, but and that's I would say that's the only differences that I've seen.
Excellent. And JP, you want to add anything?
Yep. I think from another point of view, for financial organizations are heavily regulated. So there's lots of regulations and areas that you have to comply with. And I think besides what everybody else was saying, that's kind of the main thing. And then obviously privacy plays a key role. That sort of changes in different areas, different jurisdictions. There's even legal requirements that's changing depending on which country you're working in. So I think that's going to like sort of the main areas that we sort of see. But I would say regulatory is probably number one on the list.
Excellent. Yeah, because the financial industry has so many regulatory things, audit and privacy compliance requirements, which are drive a lot of discussion there. All right, we do have some question regarding the maturity of DLP. So I saw a question from Ding, so regarding the different stage of the maturity of DLP. So I'm kind of looking at two angles. One is how mature current DLP program is. I mean, industry-wise, how mature it is. So do we still have a lot of problems, or is that pretty much mature? So that's one aspect of that. And another aspect of that is company may have different maturity level, right? Even though the industry may be mature, but the company maybe have a different maturity level. So what's your view about that? How is DLP working with different maturity stages? With that said, JP, maybe you can start.
Yeah. Maturity is kind of interesting. It's so not a term that I would use, but there's obviously a lot of technology that can sort of play into this. But when it comes to, I'm just trying to think, how would you sort of rank maturity? Technology-wise, I think there's a lot of products. The problem when it comes to data takes many forms. We sometimes talk about, we use the term structured data and unstructured data, things you can identify, things that's easy, things like credit card numbers, social security numbers, those are things that are easy to identify. The rest of the data typically forms as unstructured. These are documents. These are things that people are working with, data that they manipulate. It can be in multiple locations as well. If you follow the data, there's not a lot of coverage from a technology point of view in the industry to sort of tackle all these things. Holistically, if you have to sort of do all these things together, it's a fairly large, significant technology investment. But if I step back and simplify it, the biggest thing is people. I think even without the technology around how people manage the data, where they're putting it, you will get quite far with an awareness program as people understand the implication of actually mishandling or putting data at risk, putting organizations at risk. I think there is a significant investment around people, because in the end, it's like all these data loss issues. And I mean, unless a company is negligent, it typically involves people, like the people who started. That's why they call us insider threats, right? Because we are threats to the organization.
So, which means education and awareness plays a lot of role there.
Yep.
Maggie, I know you are the expert in come up with some like a governance, risk management framework, all those structures. At one point, I remember you won some global prize for that one. So, what do you view about the maturity level or like different DLP things?
Yeah, I think maturity maybe can be measured initially as to your once you've determined what your scope is going to be, and you're kind of just doing the basics, the low-hanging fruits. I agree totally with JP, right? Like there is you start with some easy type of rules, and then you go maturing it to the next level, and so that's one thing, right? From the technology and like how your processes and how you implement it. From the people's perspective, I think initially when you're in an initial stage where it's not very mature and you're initially creating the acceptable use policies and you're creating, it becomes a big issue about if you're not training the people, creating the awareness, and initially it's going to be perceived as something that when your program is not very mature, that is intrusive, right? Big brother watching and so on. So that can tell like where you are in your organization in terms of culture and the maturity level versus when you achieve a high maturity level, everyone is accepting of it. They understand it's needed. They know you must do it. Otherwise your company, might fail to exist. Right. So that I think from that perspective, and then the other part about from the, again, my governance hat, from the perspective of how you report on it, right? So initially you might not have as much reporting, but then eventually you're making it to all the risk forums, the risk committees, and you have very strong KRIs and reporting and metrics that really tell a story, and it helps you to mature more and more. So that's kind of how I would see maturity.
Excellent. Great insight. Still, back to a lot of things emphasize on the people, right? So the people are doing that. Jason and Leo, you are dealing with a lot of clients, right? So some of them may be more mature than the other, whatever. So what do you view about, generally speaking, the industry-wise, about DLP maturity?
Yeah, so I guess that for me, like echoing a little bit like what Maggie was saying, right? I mean, it's in my case, when I'm engaged with a customer, if I take a look at their DLP program, that typically tells me how far in they are in terms of their maturity level, right? Because remember, like I mentioned before, DLP really touches on a lot of different areas. For example, we can touch on data destruction, right? So that is another aspect of how DLP is touched on as well. So I guess maturity really can be measured by how far in organizations are in terms of these different aspects and areas of what DLP touches on. Maggie mentioned user awareness. Like if you go to an organization where users are correctly classifying data, they already know how to classify data, and they know how to tell what is confidential versus what is public and how that is supposed to be shared, then that is a great tell of how mature that organization is. And obviously, no organization is the same, starting from the networking and people even, right? So you're going to find different, I've seen it all, to be honest. I've seen organizations that are not that mature, and I've seen organizations that have a limited scope and they are mature for that limited scope. So you can in a way say that they are mature because their scope is very limited, right? So
yeah, depends on the scope. What do you try to achieve as well?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Jason, what do you want to add on that?
Yeah, all great points. One really simple exercise that I generally like to do just to measure the maturity of an organization, just take a random sampling of 10 employees, maybe 20. Well, in today's world of remote, but put them in a room and give them 100 documents they've never seen before, and have them try like basically say, according to the policies that we've given you, classify each one of them, right? And it gives you a measurement, a hard number of, and then educate them, do what you would have normally done from a technology perspective, have them come back in a month and give them 100 different set of documents and do the same exercise. And generally you'll find a threshold of like 20 to 30% success or higher, just simply because of that communication. But that's a good area of like, because it's amazing the findings you can get just from a random sampling of 10 individuals on what they think and perceive as being classifications that aren't what your organization has communicated out to the individuals. And then the other area that I would say from, and it was a point on the chat, so I did want to address it. Another maturity is how intertwined security, compliance, and legal are amongst each other, in the sense that at the end of the day, a breach is a security problem to solve for, but it's ultimately the people that face the consequence are legal, right? They're the ones that have to get to the root cause analysis. When the regulators and the clients of the individual start throwing the legal aspects of an organization, and there's so many cases where lawsuits occur because of a breach, right? And it's legal that really takes the brunt of that consequence, because they're the ones that have to get to the root cause analysis. So the better entwined that legal, compliance, and security are in an organization really does, because there's the whole aspect of people, process, and technology. It really doesn't apply just to DLP. It's to the entire holistic solution of when something does occur, how do we handle that? So it's a good question that I generally see, and I do see really sound foundations is when legal has a little bit of that technology language to understand it, and vice versa from a security perspective, is they really get what the legal consequence and what those paralegals or the law clerks have to go through in the cases of when those things happen, and there is a litigation that's made against the organization. So
excellent. Yeah, so the great comment. So I learned quite a lot from you guys. Here are a couple of things I keep hearing. One is the people, right? So at the end of the day, people are the owner of the data, right? So it's your data. You must understand your data. You must classify your data. You must to protect your data. If you cannot do that without any technology, if you cannot, like Jason said, if you cannot even classify the data, how do you protect that one? Right, so that's and also process from program management point of view, from intersection with other area like privacy, legal. At the end of the day, everybody on the stake. Right? So actually, you all had at a stake for the company. All right, great conversation on that one. Let's move on for the next question. We hear a lot of things how to start a program. So. Although I know there's no silver bullet, and the things may not apply to all kind of scenarios, but if you may, what's your top secret, kind of a best practice or whatever you think, if you can suggest, if only one thing, because we don't have enough time to talk about all the things, if you can only suggest one thing, or we call it your secret best practice, what do you want to say about the DLP?
You want to start?
Sure, Maggie.
Yeah. So one thing, I think for anyone starting a new DLP program, I think they have to have a clear strategy with goals as to what is it that they're trying to accomplish. Set up a good governance forum that includes many parts of the business, such as compliance, privacy, legal, security, fraud, and then stick to that strategy, because I think people can get distracted. And I think somebody mentioned earlier on the in the presentation that sometimes people buy a tool and then try to implement and box into that tool, whatever that tool capability is. That's it. And that, I think starting from the technology to create a strategy is wrong. I think people need to get the strategy first and figure out what tool and is going to give them what they want and their goals in their strategy.
Excellent. So that's a great starting point, how to establish your strategy first. Although tool is important, but you need to start with yourself first. All right, cool. JP, you want to add on that?
Yeah, I would say for me, the first goal, the best thing is to do is the people that's actually going to work on your investigations and incident response. You can go miles with the right individual that's got the right thinking, that wants to do the right thing and actually help protect the organization. People that think outside of, they call it outside of the box. Just there is a lot of little things you can do that can protect an organization that doesn't involve actually buying or setting up any technology. You'll be amazed how far you can go with the right people.
Mm-hmm. So still back to that, who care about this one, right? So who are the boss? So who eventually who be responsible for this one? Yep. All right, Jason, you maybe want to add something there?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because depending on the organization and how they're structured from an organizational structure, into the chat. Essentially, at the end of the day, what I always say, who cares about DLP is every single person in an organization. And the number one reason is, and I've seen it far too often, is the lack thereof data loss prevention or bad security always ends up in the front page of the news, and it always results in a brand degradation. And no one really wants to work for a company that has a bad brand behind them. Mm-hmm. Right? When these breaches occur and things like that, it's embarrassing to be representative. And I can say this wholeheartedly as being a Microsoft employee. We get put on the front page of the news from time to time, right? It hurts. It's emotional, right? And so if I were to say, like, not decision making, but who cares about DLP? Everybody in an organization should care about it, and there should be training programs within organizations when DLP policies are updated. There should be like a communication out to everyone why the importance. Like, everybody should understand it and understand why the organization put it. Excellent.
So back to the education and awareness part, right? So that's also let everybody aware the importance of this. It's not like nothing to my job. I'm in finance. I'm in marketing. Why DLP? like related to me, right? Leo, what do you want to add?
I guess what I would like to add is, that DLP really is a program and not a product, right? So what I would actually, my huge takeaway would be that, and you can take it as a best practice or as a recommendation. Focus all your efforts and energy into your DLP program, into understanding data flows, understanding where that data sits within the environment, building policies, building processes around the DLP program, because you're going to find out that, regardless of the technology that you implement, if your DLP program is, not on par or is not well developed, then you're going to have issues with the technology.
Excellent. So come to the program management, back to also Maggie's point, I think at the early part. So strategy, the goal, objective, stakeholder communication, integration. So all those are the reflect of the good program management or project management part. All right, excellent. At the end of the day, so let's say you establish a program, you apply some best practice. How do you measure the success? Of course, one way is no news, no hacking news. That's could be the external factor, but internally, as a stakeholder or the manager or your position, how do you report to the whole organization? Okay, I'm doing a great job. I establish a good DLP program. What's the metrics about that? Maybe JP, you can start.
Yeah, metrics is always interesting. Metrics brings awareness typically to areas that kind of don't know what's going on. I think the metrics that's relevant to specific areas is very relevant to sort of help drive some insights or change in behaviors that's seen in users in specific areas. So that's what kind of metrics is kind of like a key when it plays a role. The other metrics as well is just the fact that it shows that there is activity going on, there is protection activity going on, and most importantly for us at the bank, it's like mitigation and remediation effort, right? It's not about the fact that a person did X or Y. The question is about what is the exposure, how is it remediated, and what you can do it, and how can you prevent it from happening again. It's that kind of sort of feedback that kind of is continuing, and for me, that would be a measure of success. There's a lot of oversight and governance and how you monitor that also plays a role, but I think if I start in a simplistic form, that's kind of a way to do it.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. That's a great point. Maggie, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so I guess from a governance perspective, I have to agree with the metrics and KRIs and how you're reporting it. Where are you reporting these? Which risk committees? Does this data ever get all the way up to the board and so on, right? In terms of metrics, and then the other thing too, I think a measure of success is when the business themselves is coming to you and asking you to help them solve issues or problems and get solutions to how they can be compliant to certain things, right? So I think that's a good measure of success, and for that I think an organization is to be able to have a good process to receive backlogs, to build a backlog of any new requirements that the business or the technology or fraud or anybody else is asking you, and have that backlog and have a continuous development process that allows you to test the rules and keep modifying them and even fine tuning them, right? I remember way back when we had the Swift hacks and transactions that happened. It was like a big thing where like the business was coming to security to make sure that, how do we create some rules that prevent Swift fraud, right? The wire transfer fraud that was happening. And that was nice to make sure to know that many organizations did have the processes established where they can just help the business to solve issues and just show value to them.
Excellent.
I think that's a good measure of success when the business is coming to you.
Right. You mentioned the backlog immediately. I relate to another word, the agile, right? So the one you mentioned,
exactly
agility is really important.
That's exactly what I meant, right? For either use case development or for data rules development. That's the governance processes that I had mentioned before. That I think that's important to have it established, so that when something does happen, or a need is or a requirement is called out, that you have the process that you can bring those things in the backlog through and implement them, right? And go through your development process, your testing process, and then implement it and activate it in production.
Excellent. Okay, so Leon and Jason, what's your view on the measurement? Maybe Leo, you can start.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that, I would echo what Maggie and JP mentioned. I mean, I agree 100%. I think that, establishing metrics should be an aspect that should be part of your DLP program. Having KPIs for, the team that is the teams that are involved with the DLP program, as well as the technologies, right? But then again, I think that you can look at metrics and measure success in different ways, because, for example, I had a customer where, they had some sort of, data breach where an employee was exfiltrating data. And one of the important aspects that we haven't touched on that is very important is the actual forensic analysis, because by doing forensic analysis, that's how you usually build a case that is used in a court of law, right? So basically, they measured success because they were able to justify, the acts that this person made with that data that was exfiltrated. So there are different ways to measure metrics. What I can say is that, success will be and will always be measured differently from organization to the next. And they definitely need to be adapted and should be on point for the specific requirements that they want to track, right? Based on the scope.
Excellent. Yeah. I like what you put. It really is. You actually reflect the cybersecurity framework, right? So the one you mentioned, forensics, is after like a recovery part. So a lot of people focus on protection part, but actually the metrics for recovery part, how do you correlate quickly discover that's also very important for DLP.
Exactly. So for one organization, that could be, a measure of success, but for another organization might be prevention, right? So,
right.
you
Excellent. Jason, what do you want to quickly add on that one?
Yeah, great question. And actually, I would say this is one area within Microsoft that we've brought down to pretty much a science. We refer to it the cost per custodian. Ultimately, and at the end of the day, it's the cost per individual and how much data they have per the risk that they bring to the organization. And I would say another metric that we used to measure significantly, which I would say it's becoming less and less of a concern, but I do know it still is the threshold we're willing to accept around false positives. So they're always going to occur. And it's just how many we're willing to accept. And for those that are false positive is when a DLP engine catches something that says it's sensitive or meets a pattern which is not accurate.
Okay.
So it looks like a credit card number, but it's not, something like of that nature. So obviously you don't want to turn on a DLP engine that's going to tell everybody across the board day one that 90% of their content is now highly confidential when it really isn't. That's gonna cause a bigger problem than your data loss problem was in the first place. And then the other is the cost per custodian, and Leonardo is mentioned it, is the cost to the forensics aspect to it. So how much did the breach cost? And how much is legal fees going to cost in return? Because sometimes it's just worth, giving the people what they want when the breach occurs. So so not always are we losing. Obviously, when a breach in Microsoft or any organization occurs, it's always going to result in some monetary loss. It's a matter of what is the acceptable loss. Is it the loss to fight, or is it the loss to settle? So
Yeah, I like what you put, speaking from money part, right? So talk about, okay, if eventually the money you invest, can you get a return from there, right? So, and also the effectiveness of how to spend the money. So that's a return. Okay, I also realize it's coming to closer to the end of our whole event. It's getting late, but I don't want to lose one last important question. So maybe you can quickly comment on that one. I understand we don't have enough time. So that's really about talent development or people side. Because there are so many people, they are looking for career opportunities in cybersecurity as a general, and DLP is one of the major domain and across very rich domain. So what do you say, your suggestion to them? What kind of key capabilities they need to build to be successful in this field? Maybe start with Maggie.
Sure. Yeah. I think for this specific domain, data loss prevention, I think having like a personality trait of being inquisitive about data, it would be good. And then on the other side, on the technical side, really, I guess, knowing how to deal with data and large volumes of data, right? And Obviously, there is so many programs right now in universities that where you have a class where you can learn these type of concepts. However, I want to mention as well that in addition to the technical skills, the DLP domain has a variety of different skill sets in addition to technical, and ranging from communications. We talk about training and awareness. I have people in my teams that where I had the DLP program, where they were like writing, guides as to what is acceptable, what's unacceptable from an employee, right? Policies and directives and so on. So, so technical writers, right? And people that are good at standing in front of people and communicating and training, right? And typically those are more soft skills. So there's a variety and a range of skills that are useful in the DLP domain. So it doesn't just it's not just the technical skills, but there's all sorts of skills that can help.
Excellent. Communication, like soft skills, also play a very important role there. Okay, JP, what do you think?
No, I think for anybody that's interested in getting into data loss, there's the analyst side, and then there's a technical side. On the analyst side, it's pretty much any individual can kind of walk into and help, because you'll learn on the job, you'll learn about investigations. Somebody that's diligent, somebody that's communication skills as far as written and following up is very important, I think, because data loss, sometimes people think of it is a control, but it's an awareness tool as well, right? So you're bringing an awareness to people, you're communicating with them, you're explaining to them what the risks are, you're explaining to them what mitigation needs to be done, and it's a dialogue that goes on between people. So I would say communication skills and the willingness to make a difference and actually come in, that for me is the key. And
excellent.
the skills you can learn on the job. There's a lot of things you can learn.
Yeah. Every successful cybersecurity professional need to be an educator as well, right? So not only you learn, but also educate others for the things. Jason, what do you view on that one?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with both JP and Maggie. One thing I would say from a future perspective, if I'm seeing where the vendors that make DLP solutions, and it's going to change significantly over time, human cognitive behavioral analytics. That's a large word, but it's essentially, if you were to look at the history of like data loss and where it occurs, there's behaviors that people generally do that lead up to why that occurred. And so I know in Microsoft, in our research and development, that's where our investment is all going towards, is instead of worrying about data loss prevention when it occurs, is getting to the root cause analysis as to why that person is going to lead up to about to do what they're going to do before they actually do it. And I do think like the human mind and the whole cognitive aspect of it is going to play the significant role in data loss down the, like I really think data loss today is a maybe misperceived technology solution, whereas I think, and as you heard today, it's definitely not. But I think that's going to be more and more relevant as technologies evolve. Artificial intelligence becomes just commonplace as opposed to the future, machine learning and all of that. And machines and artificial intelligence, they're only as smart as the humans that sort of input that content. But that's where I would say human cognitive aspects and robotic process automation, all that stuff, that's going to be the future of DLP.
Excellent.
It's already sort of here.
Yeah, because today we talk about a lot of things. Feels like we talk about program management, people, like process a lot, but we never downplay technology. Actually, the technology is so important, right? So emerging technology like AI and ML, actually, maybe it's a game changer. So then all the things may be different you need to work on. So yeah, technology is still very, very important, especially for those, the things you mentioned, cognitive services. Leo, what do you want to say there?
For me, I mean, I always think that, the best way or the best approach is, I mean, if you're like starting from scratch right now, I mean, I would tell you, get into the cyberspace as a whole, because there's a lot of base elements that you need to know. I mean, there's a lot of aspects of networking, there's a lot of aspects of operating systems, a lot of aspects of endpoint security, which are kind of like the basics. So there's a lot of basic elements that you kind of like need to know before you actually get into a more kind of like specialized, I would say, area within the cyberspace, right? Like Maggie was saying, data loss prevention touches in so many areas that you can specialize in any of these. And but I think that, for you to be like a good, solid data loss prevention professional, you need to be able to master a lot of these different areas, right? Learn about forensic analysis, learn about, cloud. Right now, that cloud is kind of like the next big thing. Learn about IT, IoT, learn about digital rights management, encryption, because these are all different areas that in one way or another, they are part of data loss prevention, right?
Excellent. Yeah, so the solid foundation and the broader view about the whole landscape and the relation, because we mentioned like a legal, privacy, compliance, all those things, areas cross. So how they play together, that's a very important. Of course, you need to have your domain knowledge there.
Yes.
It's like a T, right? So you need to broad and also a little bit deep
And-
in one areas.
And I would also add, I mean, you mentioned project management. I mean, I feel like project management is a huge added value when it comes to data loss prevention, as well as auditing. So, for example, like there are courses around, CISA certification, for example, or CISM. Those great certifications for people that want to get into data loss prevention for sure.
Excellent. I still recall the day when I was a project manager at a data warehouse. So a lot of DLP concept I got actually not from cybersecurity, actually from that kind of project. So learn the project management, the data, and all those, how the data owners stewardship, all those kind of things. Thank you very much, all the panel, the panel speakers. You gave us a great concept and also perspective. I like to also ask everybody online. Oh no, you're sitting there for 2 hours already. Give a big applause to our panel speakers and speakers. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan.
Thanks for having me.